The saying may be true that we learn something new every day. You can probably think of something that you didn't know before, like maybe your neighbor got a new car, the cafeteria is serving lasagna, or that politician said something even crazier than yesterday. Many of the new things we learn don't really have a big impact on our lives. Sometimes, though, we do learn some new information that can truly be life-changing. Sometimes this is an entirely new idea or an opportunity that we've never considered before. Other times, it can be information that contradicts what we already know or think we know. In either of these cases, we have to decide what to do with this new information. We face a potential turning point. We have some choices about what to do. We can ignore the new information. We can dismiss it as irrelevant or unimportant. We can reject the new information because it doesn't match what we already know. Or we can accept some or all of this new information and allow it to change our beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors. I want to spend the next few minutes talking about the different responses that people can have to new information, some of the consequences, and then discuss some of the reasons for those responses. And I will also offer some suggestions for how we can make better use of new information. Let's begin with some examples of how new information may or may not influence us. I teach psychology to college freshmen. I may be a little biased, but I believe that there's a lot of important ideas in this field. One is the concept of the fundamental attribution error. We tend to believe that other people do things because of some internal characteristic, such as their beliefs, values, or their personality. And we underestimate the effects of situational factors on people's behavior. If someone comes in late to class, we're more likely to think they're too lazy to get up on time than we are to think maybe their alarm didn't go off. I urge my students to think about this concept when they consider other people. And sometimes my students tell me that this idea has actually made a big difference in the way they interact with others in their lives. I also sometimes tell my students things that contradict what they currently believe. Many have heard the term opposites attract when it comes to romantic relationships. Research suggests that the truth is closer to birds of a feather flock together. We tend to be attracted to people who are similar to us in many important ways. When I talk about this, sometimes my students argue with me. They insist that they know many people who are dating someone who's really the opposite of them in many ways. So what I'm saying can't be true. I'm known among my friends on social media as being a little bit of an internet spoil sport. When somebody posts an article about how using your cell phone at night causes eye cancer, I'm generally one of the first to look it up on a fact-checking website and post a link that debunks their claim. Surprisingly, people are not always grateful for my helpful information. And I've seen all kinds of responses. Sometimes people just ignore or delete my comments. Sometimes they argue that the particular fact-checking website I use is biased and can't be trusted. Sometimes, though, they thank me for my information, and sometimes they even delete their post. Now, I wish that I could say that I'm always really good at using new information myself, but sadly that's not the case. I often learn about new ideas or opportunities that could save me money, make me healthier, help me save the planet. I learn about these, and yet I continue to use the same products, eat the same food, spend my money in the same way. Not only do I not make good use of new information, I'm also not very willing to accept information that contradicts what I already believe. There are many athletes that I choose to admire and support, and I'm very resistant to any information that could tarnish their reputation in my mind. I was a really big fan of this guy, and I believed with all my heart that Lance Armstrong would never cheat. I dismissed, ignored, or rejected any hint that he was not as clean as he claimed to be. I've done the same thing with politicians, celebrities, even my own friends and relatives. I am no better than anyone else at welcoming information that challenges what I believe. Now, it's not just individuals, but companies, groups, corporations also get new information and have to decide what to do. The technology industry offers us a couple of examples. Apple is a company that's been pretty good about taking new ideas and using them to their advantage. They've certainly had their share of ups and downs, but they've never been afraid to take on and promote a new innovation or a new technology. Not all of their new products have been hits. Some of you may remember their flops, like Lisa or Newton. But in general, Apple's responsiveness to consumer information and needs has made them financially successful. Kodak, on the other hand, did not so readily embrace new technology. At one point, Kodak sold 90% of the film used in the United States. They were a name brand recognized around the world. Who has not heard of having a Kodak moment? Interestingly, Kodak actually developed the first digital camera in 1975. But even when it became apparent that users were preferring digital technology, they continued to try to promote their film. Some people suggest that this contributed to the downfall of Kodak Company, and they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2012. The companies that sell us our computers and our cameras certainly have some impact on our lives, but let's consider some companies that might actually influence whether we live or die. Let's take the aviation industry. When an airplane has an accident or even a near miss, an investigation is immediately begun to gather information about what happened. In 1988, an airplane flying over Hawaii lost half the roof of the fuselage partway through the flight, and a flight attendant was lost at sea. Fortunately, they were able to land the plane despite having a gaping hole in the roof, and no other lives were lost. But investigators immediately had to begin determining why the plane literally fell apart in the air. Based on the results of this investigation, many production, maintenance, and inspection standards were updated and improved that have helped make the airline industry safer. Now, some companies may be better than others, but in general, when new information comes in, the airlines respond to promote safety for their customers. They don't take chances with people's lives. Imagine if that was not the case. What if the aviation industry would dismiss, ignore, or reject any information that hinted that they needed to update their safety policies? What if, in fact, they lobbied for laws that made it more difficult to conduct research on aviation safety? Of course, you realize that would endanger people's lives, and it's not likely to happen. And some of you may have already figured out that I'm not talking about airplanes anymore. The gun industry is much less responsive to consumer safety information. There's evidence that there are policies that can promote safety and protect lives. This study conducted by the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2015 correlated the strength of gun safety legislation in all 50 states with the rates of gun fatalities. And they found that the states that have the highest rates of gun safety standards also have the lowest rates of gun deaths. The gun industry has shown little interest in changing any of their practices based on this information. And they have, in fact, promoted policies that make it more difficult to gather new information. In 1997, Congress passed a law that prohibits funding for gun safety research by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And in 2011, that policy was expanded to include the National Institutes of Health. So those are two contrasting industry examples. Let's consider one more illustration. In the mid-1800s, in a hospital in Austria, a doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis made a life-changing discovery. He was the supervisor of 2 clinics where women came to give birth. One of the clinics was run by medical students, and the other was run by midwives. Semmelweis noticed a perplexing discrepancy in the rate of death by childbed fever between the 2 clinics. The rates were much higher in the clinic run by the medical students. Semmelweis looked at as many factors as he could think of to determine why there was this difference. And it wasn't until a friend of his died after conducting an autopsy that he stumbled upon the key. The medical students conducted autopsies, and the midwives did not. Germ theory had not yet been developed at that time, but Semmelweis thought that maybe there were cadaverous particles being transferred from the corpses to the women. So he ordered his medical students to wash their hands in a chlorine solution after conducting autopsies. The rate of death by childbed fever was reduced from 18% to less than 2% in the space of just a few months. This was truly a remarkable discovery. So how would the medical community respond to this turning point information? Not as positively as one would hope. Many of the doctors were upset because Semmelweis's hypothesis made it appear as though they were the ones giving childbed fever to these women. And others were just insulted that they were being treated as unclean. The doctors eventually just gave up on the hand washing, and Semmelweis was basically fired from his job. He went on to work at many other places, and he tried valiantly to promote his hand-washing policies, but he was routinely dismissed or ignored by everyone that he worked for. He grew increasingly angry and distraught that he couldn't get anybody to listen to his ideas, and he died at the age of 47 in a mental institution. It wasn't until more than 20 years later that the medical community finally figured out what was going on. His story has prompted a term, the Semmelweis reflex, that describes the human tendency to reject new information that contradicts current beliefs or established norms. As you can see, dismissing, rejecting, or ignoring new information can often lead to less than optimal outcomes, and yet we see it happen all the time. Why are we so often unwilling to explore new ideas or accept information that contradicts our current beliefs? Social psychologists offer a couple of insights. First, humans have a limited amount of mental energy to expend on learning new things. There's a lot of information out there, and a lot of it contradicts each other. Is coffee good for me, or is it bad for me? Should I wear sunscreen or not? It seems that for every piece of helpful advice, there's an equal and opposite piece of helpful advice. It's also confusing. It's tempting to just ignore all the data and do whatever I want. It's no surprise that people aren't out there seeking new information and just sticking with what they know. Secondly, humans have 2 basic needs when it comes to thinking about ourselves. We want to be good, and we want to be right. Naturally, we are uncomfortable with any information that contradicts these beliefs about ourselves. It's a term called cognitive dissonance. It's not pleasant for most of us to think badly of ourselves. We certainly don't want to believe that we're foolish or easily misled. We are also not very kind to other people when they change their mind about something. Consider that one of the biggest insults to a politician is that she or he is wishy-washy and doesn't stand by their principles. So our limited mental energy and our desire to feel good about ourselves can result in us not making the best use of new information. How can we overcome these limitations? Here are a few ideas to help make us better consumers of information. First, develop awareness. Pay attention to your thoughts and feelings when you learn something new. We're pretty good at recognizing when other people are being unreasonable, but we're not so aware of our own biases. Foster curiosity in yourself and in other people. Be on the lookout for important new ideas and opportunities. Promote humility. Consider that other people might have ideas worth exploring and that yours may not always be the best. And finally, encourage growth and learning. Reframe new information not as evidence that you've been wrong, but as an opportunity to grow. Don't consider it a weakness to change your mind about something. Consider it evidence of learning. Let's remember our friend Ignaz Semmelweis and how his life-changing information was not accepted until years after his death. And think about all the women that died as a result. Let's work hard to suppress our own Semmelweis reflex and embrace more ideas worth spreading.